I have been fascinated by the American Gilded Age for years. The architecture, the style, the society, all of it is fascinating to me. The era itself had its good and its bad. Like much of history, though, there was a lot of bad. So to be clear, the era was great for wealthy white families led by wealthy white men. It was a time of great wealth and expansion within the US, but it was also a time of great poverty and inequality. I like the aesthetics of the Gilded Age. I do not like or agree with the values and the inequalities. Now, this video is the first in a planned series of Gilded Age builds. I'll go through a brief history of the era in this video, but there are a lot of nuances and social and political events that mark the time. My focus is on the buildings and not the political history. Please know I am not a historian. This is just a fun idea I had. I cannot fit the entire history of the age within a 20 to 30 minute video. With that out of the way, let's get into the build. The Gilded Age in America took place roughly between 1877 and 1900. This would place it within the latter half of the Victorian era of England, which was around 1820 to 1914. The American Gilded Age was an age of rapid economic growth in America. Wages for skilled workers grew, and the demand for unskilled workers increased due to industrialization, which brought in an influx of European immigrants. Skilled workers saw an increase of over 50% in their annual wages between 1880 and 1890. Despite this, the Gilded Age was also an era of extreme poverty and inequality due to the millions of immigrants. The wage gap between the wealthy and the poor grew as the population increased. Rapid expansion caused rapid wealth growth for the rich. The largest industry growth came from railroads, factory production, mining, and finance. The term Gilded Age was coined by author Mark Twain in his novel The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, published in 1873. Gilded refers to coating something in gold. The novel satirized the golden age that was promised after the Civil War. The war left much of America, particularly the South, in economic and social peril. There were serious social problems throughout the U.S. due to segregation and immigrant inequality. Slavery may have been over, but there were still very few rights for people of color, with Jim Crow laws starting in the 1870s. The gilded part of the Gilded Age comes in the form of high society. Industry allowed for rapid monetary growth for a large number of families. This economic expansion created a thin gold gilding over the social and political injustices of the age. In New York City, wealthy families were building massive homes, office buildings, libraries, and museums. Much of New York's architecture came from this era. Urban expansion was on the rise, and New York City was the epicenter. With growth and major wealth gaps comes greed, bribery, and unethical business practices. Notable members of Gilded Age society are Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Alva Belmont, William and Carolyn Astor, J.P. Morgan, Ward McAllister, William and Consuelo Vanderbilt, Edith Wharton, Jane Addams, George Pullman, Ida Tarbell, and John D. Rockefeller. Some of these names you may recognize, others you may not. Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Henry Ford, and John D. Rockefeller are household names at this point, men of industry who held a lot of wealth. Carolyn Astor was known for being the head of New York society. If you weren't in her good graces, you were a social pariah. Her son, John Jacob Astor IV, died on the Titanic. Presidents during the age were Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, and William McKinley. Gilded Age society had rules, especially for women. From what they wore to the parties they attended to how they ate their food, these rules governed whether a person was considered an acceptable member of society. Carolyn Astor was the one who defined and enforced those rules. Not legally, of course, they weren't laws, but for the women of the Gilded Age, being shunned from society was the worst possible outcome. It could also have had money ramifications as wealth was connected. Social connections meant business connections. Gilded Age mansions were massive estates built to show off wealth. The homes were inspired by European nobility, and the owners saw themselves as the American equivalent, despite the lack of titles. Often the owners were trying to one-up each other, building larger, more extravagant homes than their friends and colleagues. Most of the homes were built in the Northeast, where the financial districts were, the Upper Midwest, where the industrial districts were, or in the West, following the country's rapid expansion. Vacation homes also sprung up in Florida. Even in the 1800s, people were escaping the cold winters of the North for the heat of Florida. Many of the mansions have either been demolished or repurposed, though a few still exist today. The building I'm basing my build off of is a townhome built in New York City at the end of the era in the early 1900s. The original house had 6 floors. My build is missing an additional bedroom floor and the staff quarters. I moved the staff quarters to the basement, though they would have been in the attic. I used a combination of candlelight and electric lights. Electric lights were brought to New York in the 1800s. The wealthiest families of New York would have had the fancy electric lightings added to their new builds. It would have been expensive to run, and many families at the time lost a lot of their fortunes due to extravagant spending and 2 separate depressions within the era, the Panic of 1873 and the Panic of 1893. I love the styles of these homes. The architecture is beautiful, all of the homes are unique, and the decor and fashions of the time, while not my own style, are beautiful to look at. I hope you liked this build just as much as I did, and if you did, please give the video a like and leave a comment. My next video in the series will be one of the many libraries built by Andrew Carnegie. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, and thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.